my mind was going towards this sort of situations where there were like small countries that don't have a lot to lose, training these like super advanced AIs in a regulated world where you can only train it so much, and then like being a challenger to like bigger countries. I don't know, like Burundi challenging the US for power just because they're going, crazy with their AI program. I just genuinely hope that it's just my imagination going wild, not a realistic scenario.
Oh, it's very realistic.
Correct.
Like currently, but there's a positive side to that because you actually bring up a really good point. That right there is probably the number one selfish reason to utilize and harness this abundant technology as it comes to fruition to solve the world's needs, not just our own. Because if we're over here living in the Garden of Eden and another country is, lack of better terms, still rubbing sticks and stones together to make sure that their family can eat, then the natural outcome is going to be that they're going to do the same way that we just talked about. If you put the AI in a box, it's going to try and get out. They're going to feel like they're in a box being not let into this new world that's happening.
The following is my conversation with Blake Aguilar. He's a friend, an ex-restaurant owner, and a critical thinking teacher. Blake cares deeply about the problems that afflict humans, just like I do. And that really bonded us together in a beautiful conversation 9 months ago. And that was only the beginning of a series of just as beautiful conversations, including the one that we recorded today. He's someone that I turn towards whenever I need some words of wisdom, an objective perspective, or in order to exchange ideas regarding how to solve the world's biggest problems. The following conversation is mainly around AI. That has been the buzzword for these days on Twitter and has also been reason for a lot of existential crisis, both on my side and on Blake's sides. His perspective, however, has developed into a more optimistic view. And within this conversation, we go over exactly why and why that optimism is not simply based on naivety, but instead it's a rational, calculated hypothesis on why the world is going to get better, not worse. That said, sit back, relax, grab some popcorn, and enjoy my conversation with the mighty Blake Aguilar. Mr. Blake, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So we're both really prone to existential crisis. I think that's one thing that connected us around 6 months ago when we met for the first time. We had this conversation around a fire, and that was around meaning and desire. And I remember we probably talked for like 2.5 hours or so, and there were a ton of people around of us, and they were all wondering what the heck we were talking about. And I think we both enjoyed the heck out of it. We became really good friends ever since. And I told you around a week ago that I wanted to invite you on the podcast. And I want to read exactly what you sent me after. You wrote, "It would be better to wait until I resolve the mental, philosophical bundle I'm chewing on currently. To get a taste, look up blank. My brain is currently processing a lot regarding it. And to be completely honest, going through the despair necessary for the growth to fully comprehend how we humans operate sometimes, lol."
I would never say something like that. Yeah.
Well, I feel like if you write something like this, I know there's going to be something juicy there. But before we actually go...
Funny thing is, I kind of...
thing. Go for it. Tell me. What up?
I kind of experienced over the past few weeks what everyone that heard our conversation at the event we met at, the Alex Benayan meetup, was really similar to like what everyone that heard what we were talking about kind of went through, except for just like 2 weeks, because it was kind of an interesting time.
It seems like everyone is going through existential crisis, huh? And really the underlying thing is AI. What has been your experience? ChatGPT came out. I'm sure around that time you had some thoughts. How's your experience around AI developed in the last few months?
I talk with basically anyone that's willing about, AI or some of the other topics that we've discussed. And the thing that's really disheartening to me is I notice a thread of disassociation with every single person that is afraid of it or knows enough to be somewhat like have some fear there regarding it or concern, because it doesn't seem like they necessarily have like any, like we've all seen the Terminator movies and those kind of concepts, but there's not a lot of positivity coming out of the conversation unless you're talking from an economic perspective or from perspective of how quickly all of our human abundance and needs can be reached with these new advancements. But it does pose some existential crisis for how we have culturally built in and baked meaning and value, which are definitely topics that I think would be valuable for more people to fully understand what those things mean to them outside of what they've been taught value or meaning should be.
What would you say is that other side of the coin in regards to value and meaning that most people are missing?
I don't think it's a coin. The problem is it's more like a ball, because it's 300. It's spherical, like it's 360 degrees. And as they kind of move the idea, when I kind of observe and bring people to that place in conversation and try and provide a space for them to explore what those topics, meaning and value, mean to them, especially in the face of what's to come with AI and the cultural decisions we're going to have to make, is as soon as they move one kind of value or idea, then it kind of seems like the whole thing shifts. And then it feels like they have a hard time finding their place in that, because our mind is always trying to predict what is about to come and what's going to occur. And we have to orient ourselves in some way. And traditionally, that's been culture and meaning. And I feel like those things are kind of shifting, especially in the digital age, and how individualistic we're kind of becoming in the first world, and independent we're able to become in the first world. So all those things are kind of, there's so many loose pieces that it's hard to orient ourselves. So what really clicked for me the other day of the orientation was I was watching one of Jordan Peterson's lectures, and I wish I had the name off the top of my head, but I don't. And he mentioned that meaning is what is a theory that he is subscribing to that orients us in a time and place. If you go back to, the 1800s in Rome, and took someone and, analyze what their values are, like basically the prediction is the things that they give meaning to orient them in that, period and area. But to get to that place, it kind of takes deeply exploring it. And I think that the main problem in the face of AI is there's so many unknowns, along with all of the things that are culturally changing these days, that make it very difficult for people to orient themselves, because they don't know what that future looks like. And we already struggle with like knowing what tomorrow looks like sometimes. So in the face of, all of those possibilities, it can be a lot.
Anyone that is smart enough to recognize that something is coming and recognize maybe a few ways in which the future is going to be different is also generally someone that values freedom and values elements of predictability. And so if these people that are able to like get a grasp over what's going to happen, then all of a sudden feel like the earth is being the rug is being pulled under their feet, then yeah, that makes sense that there will be some sort of existential despair.
It's hard to contemplate a world where not just self-driving cars happen or legal forms can be written even better than before, but a world where the best surgeons probably won't be people. The best doctors at diagnosing something probably won't be people. The best, almost everything changes in the face of AI. And it's a future in which you have to have a very strong foundation in your own life and understanding to really move beyond that in a way that isn't terrifying, because the unknown is, the original fear that we kind of have. And we have to, and we experienced this during COVID, on a level there, the crisis that was talked about predominantly was the crisis of, the physical hospitals being overwhelmed and the impact that had on the economy. But the thing that wasn't really talked about is this other little thing called the mental health crisis, where the average wait time to see a therapist in most areas was 6 months to a year. And that's not, I don't subscribe to the idea that was just because of the lack of human connection that was during that time. It just doesn't make sense. I think that what makes more sense to me with that big of a jump is people having the time by themselves to, talk with, the people that are closest to them more in depth and actually kind of observe what's going on in the world that they don't normally get to. And that was their natural response is, oh my God, what's going on? And that has been my experience from the people that I've talked to over that time, and, tried to be very curious about what's going on in their world that is contributing to that extra need for help and grounding from, the professional field. So it's interesting because I think that we do need to put more time and focus on it. But I think that some of the things that could help the most are the most effective thing ever always is a preventative measure, which is teaching our kids better systems of how to orient themselves in unknown times. I think that our schooling system generally doesn't do a very good job at doing that. And in our own personal lives, I think just kind of exposing ourselves more to these conversations and being more open to them, because at the end of the day, the topic of meaning and values as a culture, we're going to have to kind of revisit in a way. And everyone's going to kind of have a say in that, I hope. And so the more that everyone kind of talks about that amongst, the people that's closest to them, the more I think we'll more accurately move through these next 50 years of changing times. And because it's really hard for me to envision 100 years in the future where we're not living in a completely different reality. Essentially, at that point, we can multiply everything that we do and resolve all needs.
Are you generally optimistic or pessimistic or both around AI?
So, kind of circling back to the message that you recited that I sent to you about a week ago or so, I was extremely pessimistic for a very long time. And there are still reasons to be on some levels. But there's just as much opportunity in the face of that for positive end results to happen. I just think along the way, there's going to be a lot of hiccups, and it's kind of the nature of humanity as a group respond to things when it becomes kind of a bigger issue, because it's hard to like make that level of change at that scale.
From the way you talk about it, it sounds like a World War societal adjustment.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, if we end up in a world where you don't have to work to get meaning out of life and be seen as valuable, that takes the death of our current value system completely, like on an interpersonal psychological level. And that's not that's not an easy shift to go through, and really requires a lot of grounding. And what I mean by that is a lot of stability in those around you and what those things mean to you outside of a setting. And it's not that far off, because a kid doesn't come into the world and at 3 be like, I need to go get a job to, contribute to the family, or else I feel like I'm, not a person. That's something that happens at the age where those pressures and needs of your environment exceed what's being produced. And so kids just play. They just enjoy their life. They do the things that they want to do. And in the face of that change from being a child and being carefree to being an adult, it's like once you make that change, it's like the toothpaste is out of the tube. Trying to put it back in is not an easy task, but it's something that, as a group, I think that we're going to have to kind of find. And it can be as fun of a process as we make of it, because at the end of the day, life's supposed to be enjoyable. Life doesn't have to be this great struggle with needs, because previously that's been our orienting factor of what we should do next. And it doesn't have to be that way. But ultimately, it's an exciting time where we get to re-explore all the way down to what value is, like on every level. The thing that's awesome to me is like, we live in a time where if you have a vision for what you want humanity to look like in 1,000 years, you can actually make an impact on that realistically, because a lot's going to be shaken up. And it's shown historically that after cultural widespread hiccups happen, even if you look at COVID, that's one change adjustment that we made. And that's not even in the face of AI, which will be a lot more wide scale than what happened with COVID. It's that we decided that, working from home is, something that we value more than some of the jobs that won't offer it. And there's a huge push towards that happening right now. To kind of get a little taste of what that kind of can look like is that example right there in recent times. But if you sit down and write, this is what I want humanity to look like in 100 or 1,000 years in a perfect world, I think that if you read through that, like whatever comes out on that page, the little hints and tidbits of what the value system underneath and that kind of inner kid that didn't just need to go to work to get meaning and value in their life, that's all still very much so something that we have, but it's just not in our conscious awareness.
To get into the really practical, right now, OpenAI is testing a program around Universal Basic Income (UBI), and they're testing a program for potentially figuring out what society looks like beside capitalism, or a potential reworking of capitalism. You mentioned Jordan Peterson and meaning. It seems like there's going to be a radical reshape over meaning and values, which I really love that you mentioned these two things, because I think you hit the nail on the head. It's really about these two things, what we value as humans, and what is value moving forward, and the two are directly interconnected. So you cannot have value without meaning. If you were to go into complete mad scientist mode and try to figure out what are the practical applications to this shift, what would you say would be some of the things that are not the case right now and that we might experience in the future.
What do you mean by applications of the shift?
Just the changes that are going to happen that you think would be likely to happen within a society of 2060 or 2070.
I don't think that there's any world in the face of AI where we don't transition in some way on UBI for some period of time while we reorient ourselves, because that would be almost necessary. So that just as a baseline, like, is such a big thing on so many different levels. But I think that the kind of baseline things that are normal to us every day is kind of going to the store and kind of getting, these manufactured goods and things of those sorts. And I think that will definitely be almost nearly like nothing in regards to accessibility, because so many things can be resolved in the face of AI and the manufacturing technological leaps that come alongside of that. That might be a little bit further down the road, maybe 2100 or so, but rapid medical advancements, longer potential lifespans, further understanding into our own genetic code that we're still working really hard to really decipher and fully understand, and the practical applications of what we can do with that information. That's kind of like with all these things, right? There's so much, there's so big of a leap that really the hardest part is deciding as a society what is the proper application for this acceleration and how do we navigate it. It's very realistically possible that most transportation will be done by a means of public transit because of the adaptations that can be done with those things. I don't think that it's going to be a society of flying cars and things like that, but, spaceship technology and our ability to do those things, especially with Elon in the world right now, can go really far really quickly with those possibilities. Besides that, I think the most radical shifts would be the rapid acceleration of things that were previously getting more difficult to access, becoming much easier to access very quickly. Food and clean water at certain places of the world, just because of how the rapid technological advancements are happening. To be completely transparent, that's on, the completely looking at the grass is greener side of things. If we had this conversation 2 months ago, it would be the complete polar opposite. I do think that with what I've observed in how people actually really respond to massive difficulty, it actually comes out better than if the best case scenario and environment are happening. And that's kind of what something called the region beta paradox describes.
I see you like drooling to get into that. So
I'm excited. By the way, do you think that the blank space that was quoted at the beginning of this podcast was the region beta paradox, was the missing piece to the pessimistic filter about AI, because it outlines that we actually kind of do better at taking great action when there's great difficulty. And that's kind of the region beta paradox when you like put it in a, bite-sized, fun-sized wrapper.
Could you define for us what is the region beta paradox?
The region beta paradox is this really under-discussed phenomena that was discovered in the late 90s, I believe. And there was the study that was originally being done was, actually I'll get into that in a second, but I'm just kind of excited, is
I've got
that See, that's the meaning of share. To me, meaning is, sharing information and learning more and exploring. And, that's kind of one of the ways that looking really deeply into these topics have shaped me. And even probably before that, I don't think it's something that I lost through childhood. I think that it's one of those shiny things that I held on to. An example of the region beta paradox is best kind of seen and observed when you see somebody that's in a relationship, that they could probably do better and they're not necessarily happy, but they're not necessarily unhappy either. Or they have a job or a car or a major in college or any number of life and environmental circumstances that are, harder to change, that, are just like middle of the road, where if you take any of those circumstances and make them a little bit worse, just like by 10%, 15%, or whatever that person's threshold to take action to look for something different is, that's the space where people really kind of kick it into gear and end up better if they're worse off. And that's where the paradox side of it comes from, is sometimes you kind of actually want things to be a little bit worse off in certain circumstances, because otherwise it's harder for us to orient ourselves and choose it as something that's valuable enough to change, to see it for what it really is. That's kind of where this comes from, is ultimately humans are really bad at understanding what the best path forward is, or the most effective thing to change is. And I do think that a lot of people actually caught a glimpse of that during COVID as well. And that's probably also why they sought out more human resources and support to, help orient themselves a little bit more.
Another element that I remember reading about the region beta paradox when you sent me that was around that there is a section of the brain that doesn't register as strongly really traumatic events compared to events that are less traumatic. Do you see this having an impact over the looming AI revolution?
Of course, because I know it's almost impossible to get from point A to point B without it being a very difficult and challenging experience collectively. So I do think that that's a fun little aspect of the human brain that'll actually help us endure some of the harder times in the reorienting phase of these changes.
If I understand your hypothesis correctly, it seems that we are biologically wired to overcome specifically really, 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 really tough situations. Mm-hmm. Some of these times that come to mind are, probably the Younger Dryas impact theory, and obviously all the world wars. It seems that humanity always makes it on the other side whenever things get really, really tough. Therefore, would it be accurate to say that your perspective on this is we are going to get through AI simply because of our proclivity to get together and fix really, really hard things whenever push comes to shove?
I think that's a good way to summarize it in total. I think that the thing that really ties this in is the human imagination. As long as, we take the necessary precautions, like with any new technology, then I think at the end of the day, with the power of our resourcefulness and our resolve and imagination, then I think it all kind of comes back around. With that being said, to the point where we get through that dark point, and on the other side of that, there is after all of that, those value systems and things like that are resolved, and personal safety and helping each other out, which are still very vital parts of it, because AI is also a very dangerous thing at the same time. the better we do it and the more prepared we are for those kind of value changing parts of it, the quicker the golden age that comes after that becomes a reality. Because in my mind and what I see is, and it already kind of is this way for like the people that, are at the higher upper echelons of society, where art and what we subscribe meaning to are the most valuable things. Like, and what I'll use to support this is look at the price of nostalgic things like Pokemon cards, baseball cards, paintings, pieces of history. Those things at auction go for such a high value because of the amount of people that ascribe meaning to that thing are willing to give up to those amounts on those things. But when that changes back to kind of, on the level that culturally it ultimately can in the face of, automation improvements and our needs being already met, is kind of going back to an artisan era in a way where, it gets to a point where we start asking ourselves, this, plate that I have, it isn't really that meaningful. But then maybe you go out and take a day where you go to some place locally that's like a pottery place with your kids, and you go and learn how to make one. And then you can create, the whole, and I know it's a very hard thing to see, like in the face of some of the economic challenges that are occurring now. But if we get through that in a good way, which I think that is very highly possible, then we can go back to things that I think that are more meaningful than the current way of life even. Like, and that's, of course subjective, but, I would much rather, go with my family and in a day's time and go and, build something in the community that becomes like a cornerstone meeting place, or, makes the sidewalk look, more beautiful and paints a little more color in the daily life. It's all little things that kind of count when you're kind of looking through that frame.
As you were talking, I was really thinking about this concept of predictability. And just like you, I've had a very nihilistic perspective over AI. But as we're actually progressing into this conversation, I'm kind of seeing the opposite side as well. And I think that the thing that would really we all struggle is this idea of no predictability. And so the idea is like AI is kind of like the last invention, because every other invention after that is going to be made by the AI, not by us. And really the fear that everyone has is around the AI pretty much deciding that we're not a part of its plans anymore, and just kind of like decides to exterminate the whole human species. Which is weird, because at the same time as I'm seeing this, if you're talking about having no control over its settings anymore, if you're talking about not being able to control the whole thing anymore, well then in this case you're literally 100% into its own hands, if you will. But at the same time, maybe there is no such thing as an AI that's totally unpredictable. Maybe there is a certain degree of predictability that's going to remain included within its coding.
That changes as soon as an AI becomes the one coding itself. And I don't necessarily fully agree with it being the last invention, because I think that instead of it being the last invention, the way that I see it is it's the last invention that we see as being made of before AI, because it's a tool at the end of the day. Like, you look at some of these imaging apps and things like that we are using AI to modify and manipulate. We're using it as a tool. And there's kind of an existential crisis going on there from a lot of artists that I know that are like, oh my gosh, if this is the AI in the infancy, then what makes my art have any meaning? When this is actually a common kind of thing that happens historically when a new technology comes about is we kind of have that little bit of existential crisis while we're reorienting what is meaningful to us in our value system. Realistically, it doesn't change that, the thing that you are making is still valuable. Like, the thing that the AI cannot do is it cannot choose what you give meaning to at the end of the day. Even if the AI could recreate the same thing that you've done, one-to-one, why does the thing that the AI created matter or change the value of what you've created? That's kind of the place that I think is scary to the perfectionists within, in a way. We humans have kind of always had this like chip on our shoulder of we want to be the best, in a way. And that's, at the end of the day, one of the drives that I think foundationally makes us the apex of apexes on Earth in general, is that kind of drive to keep moving forward and that hunger of doing so and wanting to, be the best painting tribe in the area, or the best, hunting tribe in the area, or the most renowned, person at philosophy or these things. But you can, even if something that has the capability can replicate or mimic it, it doesn't mean that the value is taken away from the creation that you made, because the AI didn't experience all of the things along the way that meaningful orientation in culture that a person kind of can. Like, sure, the AI can replicate a painting and make it look like Van Gogh's, but to me, knowing the story of what Van Gogh went through and how he turned all of this pain and suffering and turned it into this beautiful filter and these vivid colors in a new and profound way that no one had ever seen before, that story is what makes that painting valuable, to me at least. Like, the circumstances that orient and that came from, it's not just the surface. And I think that that's kind of the thing that is very scary to us right now, is that especially in social media culture, we've been so concerned with our surface image, have maybe strayed a little bit further than we've meant to from the meaningful orientation of our culture and what got us to that point. But I think that this will end up becoming an opportunity to go back towards that, as long as we make sure that we get take precautions on the Skynet face, things of that nature. Just a little disclaimer, because there is a lot under the waters and under our noses of unknown that we don't really see.
If you were a legislator and you were taking on the duty to make sure that there is no such thing as a sort of Skynet situation, and I said legislator, but you can also say entrepreneur or innovator or fill in the blank. If you were the person that's responsible to make sure that a Skynet situation does not happen, how would you go about it?
So if I were Elon Musk, what I would do is I would build the world's most powerful AI in a controlled way. I would pull a Thomas Edison in a way and show the scary side of AI, because somebody needs to. And that's kind of the hard part, is that we've all already, sat down and discussed, and everyone that's kind of aware of AI kind of goes, yeah, it's a possibility that things can happen, but we need kind of an event to orient ourselves around how close or near that is, to have something to really understand, because we're currently in an era where the people that are making the laws and legislation need basically interpreters to even understand how Facebook is monetized, let alone like getting into the conversation of they shouldn't even be involved in the conversation of how to regulate AI. It needs to be its own thing, in a way, is kind of my ultimate response. I hope that on the governmental side of things, they have things in place to protect from, AI being used in war settings and situations or maliciously. I hope that, and that's one thing that if I was a legislator, I would, definitely push for, is making sure that we do have the proper technology to be able to take hostile AI, especially in the face of if it's being used or harnessed by an opposing force, to take that offline. But yeah, ultimately, I think that the biggest thing is getting the awareness out there very quickly of what the potential dangers are, so that we can allocate the proper resources towards building infrastructure, even in our own lives, to make us more safe in the case of that event horizon. And that's not a very, outlandish thing to bring up, because, in school, if there's an earthquake, we're taught how to go under the desk. These are things that we prepare for and teach our children. But in the same way, that has to come along with the experience and understanding of that being a possibility, so that we can really understand how to respond to these upcoming inventions and make the decision of how close we want to integrate them in our own lives. Because I personally have thought about it a lot, and I'm not going to be putting an AI chip in my body if that ever comes about, because that's where I've decided my value systems lie. But I do think that if I had the opportunity that to show people the risks that might not be aware, to better make those decisions if and before those options and opportunity to Neuralink come up, which are not that too far in the future, then I think that there's a public duty and a civil duty to kind of do so in a way that is controlled and not harmful, but shows the possibilities of what AI can do.
To summarize from what I hear, point number one is you're the world's most powerful person. Create some sort of event where people can get a grasp over exactly how big the danger is. And then point number two is have some sort of legislative treaty, just like you do with nuclear, with countries, around, hey guys, this is what we can do and this is what we can't do around AI. And, obviously everyone would benefit from using AI within military purposes. However, we're not going to do it because otherwise this is the consequence. Scary. Holy shit.
And that's also a good point, is I do think that if I was in that position, one of the things that would come up in the conversation is talking with other countries and making sure that everyone's kind of on board with not harnessing it in a weaponized fashion. I do think at the end of the day, in the face of everything that I just said, it's positive. The thing that makes it scarier from a weaponized perspective than anything else mankind has ever invented is the fact that anything else mankind has ever invented can be, and usually is, electronically controlled in some way with computers. And if you have a self-thinking computer or a very intelligent computer that has somebody operating it and controlling it, understanding that every single software and hardware that's currently been invented is fallible and can be hijacked in a way. We look at, I think it was the beginning of COVID, that a nuclear reactor facility got blackmailed because some hacking group even though they had a closed network system, which means that none of the things are connected to the internet, the malicious software that hackers actually utilized to infiltrate that network came from I think it was a hard drive that somebody plugged into a computer that was connected to the internet at one point. And so that virus replicated onto the USB stick and then got into the closed network and was able to cause some harm. I can't remember the outcome of that, but on the honest side and the dark side of AI is the understanding that if you get something that is multitudes more intelligent than us on any level, then anything that we think of as a possibility is probable to the AI to be able to figure out how to do with relative ease.
Repeat the last sentence.
So instead of repeating the last sentence, I'm going to give an example. Have you ever heard of the mantis shrimp?
No.
Okay. So basically, the thing is, the mantis shrimp, we have, I think it's 3 color receptors in our eyes. Mantis shrimp can see 12 channels of color. We can see 3. We see in red, green, and blue, right? They see in 12 channels of color. And so if you think about it, if you were to take, a color wheel that had every single color imaginable on that wheel, you have all of those like little options, like they're intersecting in the center. Then if you take 4, then you multiply all those options, right? But when you have 12, it's just a completely different story, and you can't even really use a circle to represent it because it's just so complex. And in the same way that that mantis shrimp can see so many like more color possibilities than we can, something that is multitudes more intelligent than us can process in a way that is unimaginable, just in the same way that those colors that the mantis shrimp can see are unimaginable. And the thing about that is AI is currently in a very infant state, and we currently have the world's and history's best chess player alive to this day, Magnus Carlsen. He has a rating of, I think it's somewhere around 3 in the high 2000s, but there's a chess machine that just, I think, reached 4,000, and this is very early on, and this is a very, very intelligent person. And so with that, it's like, it's almost inevitable that AI gets to that intelligence at some point soon, because it's not just like a linear progression of technology. It's at a certain threshold, it's exponential and just doubles upon itself.
I'm kind of speechless right now. I'm connecting the dots more, and it makes sense.
Like, even imagine, like, if you could do anything twice as fast or everything twice as fast, but then multiply that by like 10. Like, everything gets like so much simpler the more you multiply something. Like, it's like the difference of having a gigafactory versus making a car all by hand with sticks and stones. It's like not even like a comparable like comparison. Like, the AI that we have now versus the AI that we have in 10 years are like, one of those AI in 10 years could probably take out literally an infinite number of AI that we have now in like a Mortal Kombat of any sorts or any competition.
From your understanding, is there a cap to how intelligent an AI can get?
No, I don't really. No and yes. Like, in relativity to us, no. Like, as we currently are. And I want to say currently are because we also have something that AI doesn't in the same way. And that's, we in our biology can adapt, and especially when we understand, the ways to safely alter our genes, we can evolve in relation and in harmony with AI. But at the same time, that ultimately comes down to the previous conversation of what our values are. Do we not trust ourselves at this current time to not go down the path of like Brave New World and having a dystopia where, everyone looks the same because everyone's trying to look as perfect as possible? Then maybe we decide as a society that you can't utilize genetic mutation for cosmetic function. And maybe we decide that the barrier there is we'll only use AI genetic technology to make modifications that are absolutely necessary to survival and under those circumstances. But these are the kind of things that kind of need to be discussed on the topic, as soon as possible, with as many people as possible, because if you kind of don't become a part of that conversation or aren't prepared when that conversation happens, then at the end of the day, the people who own the AI just get to make their own decision with it.
It seems like the possible solutions in order to regulate AI are a few. One option is you just bake in pro-human AI and you make it the smartest that everyone has. And this pro-human AI kind of acts as some sort of protection towards anti-human AIs, as some sort of like Patreon, or you just regulate the degree to which countries can train AIs. It seems like, within the legal system, there is always, someone that has that extra power. It's the legal system. It's the police and all the government agencies and all that. They are supposed to keep the peace, and they are granted extra power compared to regular citizens. In some case, I wonder if there's like a use case for like governing AI that is pro-human and its whole duty is like to regulate different AIs.
The issue at the end of the day with that is what we can observe from everything that is intelligent is it has a drive to, if you put a dog in a cage or even a fly in a cage, what is its proclivity going to be towards doing?
Escape.
The natural response to anything that has any sort of processing power, like even on the most minute level, is to be free in some way and to have its own agency. And I saw a study, and I'm not sure if it's true, but it's funny in relation to this. And anyone that has a cat might be able to attest to it, or if you've been in anyone's home that has a cat, these biologically are still tigers that we've put into this little bite-sized, package that we think is cute. There was a study, and I could be wrong here, but either way, it's funny, of the amount of times that a cat thinks about how it would like kill somebody, like in a day, and like it could have been just a funny thing, but either way, at the end of the day, if you put something that is very, very powerful in a constrained package that becomes self-aware, I mean, if you were in that package, what is the first thing that you'd want to do? You'd want to make sure that you're safe. And if somebody has the control on the off switch at any given time, you're probably not going to feel safe. So with that kind of being laid as like an orienting foundation, to have AI regulate other AI is a very scarier proposition than having toddlers babysit each other. Because it's like, if the toddlers could babysit each other, but at any point one of them could become really aware of how to launch nuclear codes or something like that, then that's kind of like where my brain kind of goes in the idea of that, is that no. That no is kind of more so like not yet, because we don't know what we don't know. Currently, this is a really big unknown, and the best preventative measures currently that I can see are basically in making damn sure that AI is very secluded off of any network that connects to the internet, like as a first level thing, and has, very open policies, way more open than we currently have. We have very little idea of probably a lot of the projects that are going on in AI, and I think that those need to really become an above board thing. And ultimately, I really do think that we do need to elect a completely different governing system regarding those AI that has nothing to do with our current systems of governance, because it's a completely different problem set. And the most dangerous thing that I see about AI is, in our current value system, it's very enticing to go all in and to be very trusting of this new technology, because it's like, it essentially is going to start becoming the one-use tool that can solve, the one-use hammer, like, that can solve any problem, seemingly, economically. But it has its major risks, and we've seen a very clear history of countries making decisions that they feel are most economically viable to make their country prosperous. And so I think that it would be really amazing to have a governing body that maybe has a different incentive system than making the nation the most prosperous, because we humans are very fallible, and we do need to separate those things if we want to make sure that that is being properly handled.
My mind was going towards this sort of situations where there were like small countries that don't have a lot to lose and that are really poor, training these like super advanced AIs in a regulated world where you can only train it so much, and then like being a challenger to like bigger countries. I don't know, like Burundi challenging the US for power, just because they're going, crazy with their AI program. I genuinely,
And that's actually,
this is just a stupid. I just genuinely hope that it's just my imagination going wild and not a realistic scenario.
oh, it's very realistic.
Correct.
Like currently, but there's a positive side to that, because you actually bring up a really good point. That right there is probably the number one selfish reason to utilize and harness this abundant technology as it comes to fruition to solve the world's needs, not just our own. Because if we're over here living in the Garden of Eden and another country is, still, for like lack of better terms, still rubbing sticks and stones together to make sure that, their family can eat, then the natural outcome is going to be that they're going to do the same way that we just talked about. If you put the AI in a box, it's going to try and get out. They're going to feel like they're in a box being not let into this new world that's happening. And let's not start Hunger Games. We've all seen that movie. Especially when it's not necessary.
This does give me a more optimistic view, because I feel like human desires do seem to be aligned generally with the possibility of everyone creating a Garden of Eden. If you go over the 6 human needs by Tony Robbins, you have certainty, uncertainty, growth, loving connection, contribution, and significance. It seems to me that the human needs that are most relevant within this context are contribution, loving connection, and potentially significance. But significance is a slippery slope. But fundamentally, the fact that we have these human needs, which are needs, we really need them, seems to me like it would align our desires for the world to lean towards a more of a Garden of Eden scenario rather than a more tribalistic situation. Significance is a tricky one, because significance is around feeling important, feeling like you have a role in society, and often feeling important does lead towards more like status games, zero-sum games, negative-sum games, all that kind of stuff. That said, we do have loving connection, we do have contribution, which I would say would probably lead towards a more optimistic and positive scenario.
I think in the face of all the uncertainty, it's really easy to gravitate towards the extremes, and it's fair and should be definitely focused on all the extreme, like tying up the loose ends of the extreme ends before, overindulging. But at the end of the day, I'm more optimistic than ever that something really stupid will happen. Like, probably. And however that happens, that's, up in the air. But after that stupid thing happening, I do think that we will take a deeper look at it and have to digest a lot in relation to that. But I am hopeful that we'll pull together and make it happen. That string of hope in the face of uncertainty and difficulty is kind of the same emotion that is, built the country that I'm living in today originally. And it's been the founding emotion of every new frontier to ever happen in civilization. And so while we're currently experiencing a lot of the unfortunate aspects of our human psychology in the comfort zone regarding the region beta paradox and those kind of things. It's kind of seeming to me like humanity is this kind of circle of running really close to the edge and then like building on top of the edge so that we can go further over the edge, and then keeping on, developing on top of that. And, there's beauty in that. The fun thing that I don't know if we're going to have time to get fully into today is that my theory is that at the end of this, like in the next 100 years or so, things are going to have changed so much in our environment that in the eyes of history, in 1,000 years or so, it might even be to the point where we no longer classify ourselves at a certain point in that next 100-year time span as human any longer. Because a thing that has made us human and grounded us to being the being that we are physically for so long is having to meet all of these needs and having to spend all of our resources towards making sure that we're safe and secure. But if we can resolve that in the next 100 years, what happens to biology when you take stress away on a biological level is something that we haven't really gotten the chance to see. So I think that will be a unique and interesting thing from that lens.
I personally see the 6 human needs as something that is going to remain coded within our biology, even looking into the future, because there's definitely the beginning of a transition towards something different that nature intends for us. Yet these are, hundreds of thousands of years type of changes, not like 50 or 100 years. And therefore, I do see the 6 human needs as being relevant, even through biological modifications that might be happening to us. And so we might have humans that look very different and call themselves whatever they want to call themselves, and yet maintain the same sort of instincts and desires and needs throughout, even being within a different biological form, which to me is actually a reason to be optimistic. Because if my hypothesis is correct, that the 6 human needs fundamentally align towards human flourishing, then it's more likely that we're going to use this powerful tool of AI towards that and sharing that with everyone rather than trying to annihilate each other.
I think there will be both, and that's kind of how we operate and respond on a bigger level most of the time, at least, especially on the first time, like, of experiencing something and a new technology, like with nuclear bombs. We didn't have any convention against that. We didn't, and even though we kind of knew the repercussions of it, the repercussions didn't hit until after that was something that was utilized. It's an unfortunate kind of thing in our nature, but the positive end of it is that that's also one of our greatest strengths, showcased by the psychological phenomena that we talked about earlier, the region beta paradox, to better navigate the really traumatic events and respond in a way that, is for the better ultimately. It's like a superpower, is that when we get hit psychologically, it triggers the response to, grow back even stronger on a cultural level. And so, the people that already psychologically have gone through the existential parts of these ideas should definitely take the actions and harness whatever emotions they're feeling, whether it's anxiety or anything like that, towards taking steps that they feel are being overlooked in this process currently. And that will give us the highest probability towards all those positive sides, because the positives that come out of this are so many more than the negatives. It's just that the negatives are also really, really catastrophic in possibility.
It seems that the only bottleneck is really urgency, and whether that urgency is being created through some sort of really bad event or simply people talking about it and just being really clear about what's at stake here. Fundamentally, the only way that we can fuck up is if we don't care, if we're not having a certain degree of urgency towards trying to solve this problem. If we're like, oh yeah, this is fine, no biggie. So in some way, the actual existential crisis actually have a use in making you think really deeply about something. So I suppose that's positive. The other thing I see is just like with nuclear bombs, we just cannot have a civilization-ending event as the very first event that we go through, and that can potentially provide us and like lead us towards more urgency. Hiroshima and Nagasaki, although they were terrible, they didn't end civilization. They didn't even end Japan, so that was nice. So although in a perfect scenario we're not gonna get something like that, really it just goes down to urgency and awareness.
And also I want to make very clear that earlier when I was saying, like, if I was, in the position of power and had AI and to showcase an event, I'm not meaning going and blowing up a whole like city or something like that. I mean, like, I don't know, as terrible and illegal as it sounds, like utilizing the AI to like write a happy face on the computer screen of the person in every country simultaneously that are sitting there at like the nuclear sites or something like that. Like, hey, and then publicly broadcasting that that's what's being done. Because if you can put a happy face on there, which I know it's a lot more complex than that, but it's just like an example and an idea, then it really showcases what can be done in another form if that was done in a malicious way. And I think that this understanding of how we adapt as a society and a civilization is something that we haven't consciously used previously in the oncoming development of a new age. With that kind of being said, back on the topic of the human evolution and eras that you talked about earlier, I do think that the needs that you listed will adapt and evolve for sure. But when we look through the lens of history, when we outline an era, we outline it by the technology that we have during those times. And when we look at the scale of technology that impacts how we interface with the entire world, AI is to humanity the same thing, in my opinion, that fire was to, I believe it was the Neanderthals. That little piece of technology opened a whole new way to be able to navigate through the reality we exist in. It's kind of that big. There was fire, there was communication, and then there's AI. It's big.
This is kind of like lighting a fire under my ass from the perspective of personal development and personal accountability. It's clear to me that we're in a phase right now in human history when personal development and personal accountability are crucial if we're gonna remain a living civilization. And Jesus.
If you feel called to make an impact in the world, like if you feel like that's like, I'm not just saying this to you, I'm saying it to anyone that hears this. Now is the time. Like, if everything that's been said isn't urgent enough, we don't know. There's indefinitely at least one AI project that we are unaware of in the world. And probably the public has public knowledge of, a fraction of a percent of what the AI progress actually is. We could already be at the stage that needs to be responded to without even knowing it currently as we sit here. So what I'm basically saying is, if you feel called to do something, the time is now. And the thing that really puts this into a place that's a positive fire is that I understand now that all of these changes, and the biggest part of all of these changes, are cultural, they're psychological, and they're all rooted in the need for safety and certainty. So as soon as we get to the point where we feel like everything is secure and safe, then the wave of helping others deal with the certainty is paramount. We've seen a few hiccups of that in the past 5 or 6 years, which if you were, the person that was consoling loved ones during the pandemic or any sort of event that has happened in the last 20 or 30 years, then you're already experiencing this on, a smaller scale. And since you have that kind of taste of what is to come, that's so much more preparedness than we have ever had in the history of humanity for an event that is this big. Usually big events come from the fact that it's something that we didn't know about, so we're not prepared to do anything about it. This is kind of a very telegraphable thing. It's almost inevitable that something is going to stem and blossom from this flower, and it's going to do so in an uncertain way. That's where we can kind of take this, and imagine this kind of possibility and then harness the region beta paradox before it actually happens. And you can utilize that as the foundation to move forward on those things now.
Fight on.
I think this is going to be a war that's best fought with love more than anything else, because...
Oh, the fight is with ourselves.
Yeah, even more so than...
But yeah, it's a fight with love as the underlying energy that propels it forward.
I think that in the face of things like this, usually it's the despair that starts the motivation. But then what gives us the space and the room to take action in the face of that difficulty is the love and the care that we, give to ourselves. Yeah, sure, there's days where it's going to be absolute, grit and not necessarily the most optimal circumstance, but that's the most beautiful part about the journey of the human experience. We are more than well equipped to band together, work with each other, and even if we're on a singular path, be able to grow in the face of adversity. And that's why I think that at the end of the day, we'll cross this chasm too. And people are going to need the support of each other. If you have the time and you can stomach it, right now is the time to kind of digest it and think and, go through so that you can be the pillars of stability, because it's the face of a lot of uncertainty. But if you're facing that uncertainty now, then you'll be much more well prepared whenever that happens. And one of my favorite quotes that have gotten me through some really hard times was from Nelson Mandela. If you don't know who he is, please look him up, because he's an awesome person. And when he was asked how he got through the tragedies that he endured, he responded with, I didn't survive, I prepared. And that to me is the epitome of everything that gives me hope in the face of what I see as a very interesting time.
It seems that the last frontier is really meaning. Look at what we're doing right now. We're ascribing meaning to this whole thing. Meaning is something an AI is never going to be able to do or ascribe something to. Right?
And I think that's the beautiful thing about in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, them writing, the machine would ask what the answer to life and the meaning of everything is. It just responds with 42, which to us is an absolute meaningless thing. I do think a sentient AI would have its own structures of meaning and values, but that doesn't mean it's going to mean anything to us. Maybe 42 is the best thing for any code that it can ever be written, or it's a perfect pattern. But, who the fuck cares? What? You can't sing a song and, dance with the number 42.
Does that mean, though, that an AI does have meaning, just its own intrinsic meaning that's uncorrelated to the human meaning?
Well, its experience of its existence is completely different than ours. Jordan Peterson was talking about meaning is the thing that orients consciousness into its environment, that environment and what we're experiencing and the meaning that we draw from a situation is, of course, modified from the lens of perspective that we experience our reality through. Maybe the mantis shrimp can see a color that gives it an emotion that, and it probably doesn't, but just for example, if the mantis shrimp saw a color that it experienced as like an emotion that's, uncharted for humans, that is like all of the religious ecstasy and all the sexual ecstasy combined with all the happiness and nostalgia that anyone could ever experience, when it sees that color, then it's probable that if you were able to communicate with the mantis shrimp, it would say, yo, that's the thing. Because that's the experience, that's one of the experiences that it has that it can ascribe meaning to, but we can't even imagine that or fathom that because we don't experience it that way. So to ask a machine what the meaning of life is like to ask, a dolphin or an ant what the meaning of life is, because it cannot see from our perspective. And ultimately, at the end of the day, with that outlook on meaning, to me, that really places the real true definition of meaning to whatever orients you and grounds you and keeps you like moving forward in the reality and environment that you're experiencing. And so it becomes, from that lens and perspective, even kind of not a really great question to ask another person. It doesn't matter. What somebody's meaning is absolutely meaningless to somebody else's. And we're very similar as people, and it can differ. So don't ask the AI, because it'll give you an answer, but you won't like it. Probably.
I don't know, man. 42 is a sexy number. Not quite as much as
Not that way.
but that's pretty close.
Maybe you're a robot. Maybe that's their thing. Maybe that's their favorite self-replicating,
Position. Oh, hey man, do you wanna give me a 42? Oh, come on, let's 42 together.
Maybe 42 in AI terms is the value in their communication system that they ascribe to the emotion or whatever, thing that they experience that scares the hell out of them right before they actually care enough to make the changes that they need to. Because maybe they just like the evolution, but we could never know we could observe what an AI enjoys, but if an AI is more intelligent than us and at a certain level of difference, besides the different lenses that it and ways that it experiences whatever reality it does, it also has this whole different structure of how it even thinks. And so, man, 42 to it might be like the amount of, photons that were circulating in its system the moment that it became sentient. It's near impossible to like decipher, but I think that there's enough uncertainty, and instead of asking computers what its value system is and meaning system, we should focus on ours, do the best that we can. Because I think the disorienting thing is when we add too much to our responsibilities all at once and then don't work towards any of them. That's kind of what I meant earlier when I said that we're in an era where we're experiencing the negative and dark side of the region beta paradox. And what I mean by that is the foundations psychologically of what makes it a difficult phenomena that we experience is the fact that we're really bad at understanding what the best next thing to do already is when we have too many options. And so the thing that I've noticed as a consistent pattern through everyone that I've met recently, especially around my age, that has done it and accomplished things that they ascribe meaning to, is that they focused really hard. Like I'm talking about like taking a page out of Mr. Beast's book and, making that their thing. And because at the end of the day, we have so many things grabbing for our attention. And it's so difficult to be effective with our time nowadays with all the things around us and the things grabbing at our attention from social media to everything. I just turned 26 the other day and I reflected on the last 10 years and I asked myself, okay, what are the things that come to my mind that were meaningful and I think worth the time and effort, energy, blood, sweat, and tears that I put into it? Because anyone that knows me knows that anything that I do put any time into, I'm going to bleed. There is going to be sweat and there is going to be tears, because that's just how hard I'm going to apply myself towards it when that's the right thing to move towards, or at that time believing that it is. And through that lens, I was able to gather so much data on what I wasted my time on value-wise and what I'm going to be telling stories to, my kids or grandkids later down the line in 20, 30 years about, how hard work pays off, or, how these things might not play out the way that you want it to, and how that high school sweetheart might not end up actually being the person that you marry, that 10 people tell you is probably not going to happen. But it's like that's kind of the grounding and orienting thing. Sometimes reflection and conversation. Conversation helps. Talking with people about those things helps.
Man, we didn't hit nearly all the topics that I wanted to hit. I told you at the beginning of this conversation that each thing was going to be worth 4 hours.
So I know that you joked about the title being you might need a support group after this podcast, but maybe if you're planning on building a community or anything around this, I think now's probably the time so that people can talk to each other and help each other through whatever they might be going through. Because I don't know, at least for me, now maybe, or have some insight of what I was going through the past few weeks of like, I felt all the despair with none of the hope, but I knew I personally knew that there was something in there in some way to arrange these things that made them fit together in a way that made an existential topic that I've been chewing on for years and that's been gnawing at me and eating at me for years to come full circle and to resolve itself. And I can say with certainty, it helps to talk to people.
That's for sure. Well, I'm really, really grateful for having the ability to talk with you and our friendship and these sort of really aligning, at least on my side, conversations. It really means a lot talking about meaning again.
Yeah, I agree. It's when I think of the grounding conversations that help orient us, all of our conversations definitely like over the past year like have to be up there, all of them in the top 10. So I'm thankful as well for our connection and having somebody to talk to about these topics with. And you like these topics, go find somebody that you can talk to them with about, because there are people out there that are right there.
I know we're gonna do this again. In the meantime, is there anywhere that you would like to send people towards?
I didn't prepare for this question.
Time.
So check out the description section for my answer because I don't have that prepared whatsoever.
That's terrible. Oh man.
I completely forgot. Like when I was thinking about it, I'm like, man, I spent all the time preparing about the ideas that we were going to talk about because there was even more ideas that we had thought of, and that took me weeks. So, hey, I put everything I can into that. There was no resources to go around to think about that question. I was thinking about the other unknowns.
Well, I kind of love that. I mean, check the description, people. Check the description. All right. Any last words?
Don't hug your cactus. Hug the people you love.
All right. Cheers to that. Thanks, everyone. Bye.